we're checking out a brand new lens, the Sony 50mm 1.4 G Master. Let's go. So just came back from Yosemite with my friend Chris Brockhurst, where we got to film with the new Sony 50mm F1.4 G Master lens. Now real quick, we did get permission to film in Yosemite, so shout out to the good people at NPS for making that process very quick, and also shout out to my friend Jevin for making his national parks video, talking about how content creators can get permission to film at national parks. Chris and I are gonna work on a video explaining the entire process of how to film at parks like Yosemite, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, it took the Sony 50mm F1.4 G Master lens with us, and together we shot some pretty amazing and beautiful content. Also, Sony is not sponsoring this video whatsoever. They did send over the lens for me to check out, and I'm definitely going to share my personal hands-on experience with this lens, as well as comparing it with the Sigma 50mm F1.4 lens and the Sony 50mm F1.2 G Master lens. We're gonna get to all that fun stuff later, but first, let's talk specs. The Sony 50mm F1.4 G Master lens is a super compact and lightweight prime lens. It weighs only 516 grams and is very identical to the Sony 24mm F1.4 G Master and the 35mm F1.4 G Master. There are two XD linear motors, which provide smooth, silent, accurate, and fast autofocus performance, and has an 11-blade circular aperture for that smooth, creamy bokeh. Ooh. And as far as focus breathing goes, there is reduced focus breathing, which is of course great for filmmakers. In fact, here's a clip shot with the Sony a7S III, a camera that does not have focus breathing compensation, and here you see a little bit of focus breathing, but not so much. Here's another example, but this time with the Sony a7 IV, a camera that does have focus breathing compensation, and with that feature turned on, you don't see focus breathing at all. Moving on to the exterior of the lens, it is dust and moisture resistant. You have a nice smooth focus ring and an aperture ring that's declickable. Right over here, you have your aperture click switch, so turn it on if you want it clicky, and turn it off if you want it more smooth. And you also have an iris lock switch to lock your focus in case you accidentally bump the ring. There are two multi-function buttons around the lens, so you can assign it to whatever function you want. And of course, an autofocus manual focus switch. All right, Chris, you have the 50mm, right? 1.4?
Yes, I do.
What do you think of it so far?
A lot smaller than the 1.2.
Yeah.
Same features on the actual physical lens, which is really nice. Fraction of the price. It's definitely, if you don't want to spend the money on the F1.2, the F1.4 is a really good option for you.
And Chris is actually comparing the F1.4 and 1.2 here in Yosemite, so if you want to check that out, then go watch this video, link down below. Now, as far as my personal user experience with this lens, I love it. I love how small and lightweight it is. I love how fast the autofocus is. I mean, there were a couple times when shooting at f1.4, the focus wasn't on point, but I think that's kind of true for most prime lenses shooting that low of an aperture. But for the shots that I got for photos and video, I was incredibly impressed with the image quality. Like these photos over here shot at f1.4 just produced some amazing imagery. Just loved every photo that I took with this lens. And shooting video with the lens, especially at f1.4, really separated the subject from the background, and paired with my Sony a7R5 just kind of makes it a really cool combo. In fact, most of the time that I was in Yosemite, I had my a7R5 and the 50-1.4 on one hand, and my a7S III and 16-35 on the other. So I had a vlog setup and I had a photography/B-roll setup. But overall, I really enjoyed shooting with the Sony 50mm f1.4 lens way more than the more expensive Sony 50mm f1.2 lens. Not even kidding. Like, I love that lens. Like, here it is, but it's a thick boy. In fact, side by side, you see that it's taller, it's thicker, it's definitely heavier. And when you're comparing an image shot at f1.4 and f1.2, like this shot over here, at first glance, you can't really tell the difference. I mean, obviously with the image shot with the Sony 50mm f1.2 lens, you do get that blurrier background, but in terms of sharpness and overall image quality, both of these photos look nearly identical. And as far as autofocus performance goes, I mean, to be honest, they're both very similar. I mean, if I had to pick a winner, I'd probably say the Sony 50mm 1.2 G Master lens is slightly faster because there are 4 XD linear motors inside the lens, where the new 50mm f1.4 only has 2. But honestly, the Sony 50mm f1.4 G Master seemed almost just as fast. I mean, at this point, it's kind of hard to make the argument to buy the more expensive Sony 50mm f1.2 G Master lens, especially when the newer Sony 50mm f1.4 lens does just as good of a job and is also cheaper. Now, when compared with the Sigma 50mm f1.4 lens, I mean, on paper, both lenses are nearly identical. Here they are side by side. You can see that the Sigma lens is taller, but they are pretty much similar in girth. Girth. Obviously different exterior layouts, but similar features like a focus ring, aperture ring that's declickable, and an iris lock switch. But really the only physical differences between the Sigma lens and the Sony lens is the filter thread and the custom multifunction button. The Sigma only has 1, while the Sony has 2. Now, in terms of image quality, both these lenses are extremely identical. Like, it was really hard to tell a difference between this shot and this shot and that shot. And as far as autofocus performance goes, I mean, they're very similar. The Sigma does a great job keeping up with autofocusing, but the Sony 50mm f1.4 does a slightly better job. Now, comparing all 3 lenses, ooh la la, here they are. Over here is the Sony 50mm f1.2, here is the Sigma 50mm art lens, and here is the new Sony 50mm f1.4 lens. And you can see that the new Sony 50mm is the smallest of the bunch. Both the Sony 50mm f1.2 and the Sigma 50mm art lens share the same exact filter thread size at 72mm, where the new Sony lens has a smaller filter thread at 67mm. So keep that in mind if you have filters and if you need to get step-up rings or not. Now, comparing image quality with all 3 lenses, here's a shot that I took of Chris using the Sony a7R5. Can you tell the difference? No? Maybe take a guess? I'll wait a few seconds. Give up? Well, here are the results. Now, it was kind of hard to tell the difference at first, but my favorite shot of the 3 was the one shot with the more expensive Sony 50mm f1.2 lens. Obviously, you're shooting down to f1.2. Background is going to be just a little bit blurrier. The bokeh is going to look smoother, but other than that, all 3 images look nearly identical. So honestly, you can't really go wrong when trying to decide which 50mm prime lens to get. But to wrap it all up, here's what I think. If you are on a budget and you're looking for a high quality 50mm prime lens, then the Sigma 50mm f1.4 art lens is gonna be your lens. I mean, it's really hard to beat $849. I think Sigma priced this lens incredibly well, where the other Sony lenses are more expensive. But if you're looking for a kick-butt 50mm prime lens that has incredibly fast autofocus performance, that's accurate and quiet, and has that really smooth, creamy bokeh, then you're gonna wanna get the Sony 50mm f1.2 G Master lens. I'd probably say more for photographers than videographers, because I can't imagine filmmakers wanting to shoot a f1.2 unless it's for like a creative look. And so yeah, if you have more room in your budget and you are a photographer that wants to have fast autofocus performance with that creamy bokeh, then the more expensive Sony 50mm is going to be your lens. But if you're looking for a lens that is a compromise between these two, that has reduced focus breathing, that is incredibly sharp, and has that nice creamy bokeh, then the new Sony 50mm f1.4 is going to be your lens. And so yeah, if you're on a budget, go with the Sigma lens. If you're looking for the top-notch quality, fast autofocus performance, super smooth, creamy bokeh, the more expensive Sony lens will do. But I think a great middle ground between both these lenses is gonna be the new Sony 50mm lens. I personally love it. I love it more than the other 2 lenses, and it's a lens that I'm actually going to get because I'm on a mission to like reduce the amount of gear that I carry on my travels. Like, I love the 50-1.2. It's just that it's heavy. It's way too heavy. I'll probably keep it at the studio, but ideally for all my travels, the Sony 50mm f1.4 is going to be great to carry. But honestly, I don't think think you can go wrong with either one of these lenses. I mean, they're all great lenses. And so, yeah, I'll leave it up to you. Which lens would you prefer? The Sigma 50mm f1.4 art lens, the more expensive Sony f1.2, or the new Sony 50mm f1.4 G Master lens? Wow, I'm tired. That was a video. And I know it wasn't a deep dive into all these lenses. And so if you have any questions specifically about the new Sony 50mm f1.4 lens, then let me know in the comments below and I'll try to help you out. But other than that, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.